So we're an arts centre and we share a building with the homeless charity Crisis. And we've always been interested in understanding the impact of our work, so that we can learn from the work that we do and how to be better, but also so that we can demonstrate the impact of our work to the funders that make it possible. So over the years, we've experimented with lots of different monitoring and evaluation methodologies and approaches, but we've actually found it to be a real struggle. We found often that things like conventional form filling and number counting, they risked really undermining the relationships that we built with people. They could be quite disruptive to the projects we were running. And we often found that the numbers we were counting, we felt that they didn't really paint the full picture of what was happening, and often they could be kind of misleading. So we really wanted to try something new. And so we began working with external evaluator Anne Pirrie, who introduced us to the storytelling methodology, and then with Anne, we've kind of developed it into its current form that we use at the Old Fire Station. We're really aware lots of people use storytelling, as we kind of is reflected in this, the things happening over the course of today. We're not experts in the methodology. It's something that, we're very much an art centre that has stumbled upon a way of learning that we feel really works for us, and has really enabled us to shift evaluation from something that was, very much an add-on at the periphery of our work to something that's become a really central part of who we are and what we do as an organisation. So that's kind of how we came to storytelling, and I'll now go on to explain a bit more about what it is. So storytelling, it's based on the most significant change evaluation methodology, which is kind of most often used in international development circles, and it's also known as monitoring without indicators. And at its core, it's about collecting stories from participants about what's changed for them, and then analysing these stories in a participatory way to draw out the learning from them. What distinguishes most significant change from other evaluation techniques is that it doesn't determine quantitative indicators that are developed in advance, but instead it asks the people involved to tell us what does change look and feel like for them. So most significant change is particularly good for capturing change that is unexpected, that's emergent, personalised, intangible, that's diverse, and for really understanding how that change happens. So that's the basis of the storytelling methodology, and this is how it looks for us. So first of all, we recruit and train a team of volunteer story collectors, who in our case involve crisis members, so people with experience of homelessness, artists, staff, volunteers. These story collectors, they then, they're trained in kind of active listening techniques, and they then meet individually with a storyteller, who's somebody who's been involved in the project that we're evaluating, and they have a discussion about what's changed for the storyteller as a result of their involvement in the project. This conversation, it's recorded, it's transcribed, and then it's edited down into a 1 to 2 page story that really tries to capture what did that person say change for them as a result of their involvement in the project, and to do that in a way that really tells that story in their own voice and words. So often it's quite verbatim, and it captures the kind of texture of the way they said it as much as what they said. We then, to help us kind of draw the learning out from these stories, we hold discussion sessions. So these are sessions where we bring together people who have different relationships to the stories, to the thing we're trying to learn about, to us as an organisation. And everybody reads the stories in advance or listens to them. We then kind of come together to say what are the themes and the kind of the key things that are coming out of these stories, and what might they mean for us as an organisation in terms of our learning. And then the final part of the process is that we share these stories publicly. So we share the stories themselves, we write a report about the learning, and then we also use lots of kind of creative means to kind of share them more widely as well. So we've had 5 kind of main goals at using the storytelling methodology. The first time we used storytelling was through what we called looking for change, which was when we kind of just asked people who worked with us, whether as staff or volunteers or artists or crisis members, to tell us about what a change for them as a result of knowing us and being a part of our organisation. What came out of that process was really insightful, and it really brought to attention things we hadn't known about what was significant for people, and it actually resulted in us completely rewriting our mission statement to reflect that. And the key thing being that people said the most important thing about working with us was about relationships. So it made us realise that was more of a central part of who we were than we had realised ourselves. And I'll just kind of focus on 2 of these ways we've used storytelling in a little bit more detail now. So the first one, this is kind of the sharing of some of the photos and stories from Icon. So Icon was a project that we ran in collaboration with photographer Rory Carnegie. So Rory worked in collaboration with crisis members, people with experience of homelessness, to recreate famous iconic images. And it was one of those projects that I think everybody involved knew that Icon was a really special project. There was a lot of buzz around it, but we needed a way to communicate and to really understand what that kind of impact really meant and looked like and felt for the people we work with. So we collected the stories of 11 people involved in Icon. So they included crisis members, as well as the artists and volunteers and staff who've been involved. And we collected those stories, and we then held a discussion session that brought together different people involved to varying degrees in the project, and drew out the learning from that. So these are 2 examples of kind of excerpts from a couple of those stories. And here, there isn't time to go into it in detail, but this is the kind of learning that we drew from that. These were some of the things the stories told us that people, was the impact for the people involved in Icon. So people said it was a chance to collaborate, that they felt part of something, that they discovered new things about themselves, that they developed creatively, that they developed new skills, they made connections, built confidence, felt a sense of pride, felt able to move forward with things in their life, and had fun. And these are some of the things the story told us were why. So because there were high expectations, people felt valued as part of a team, hierarchies were broken down, people learned through doing, there was flexibility, there was clarity and structure, and people were able to engage in different ways, and people felt supported. And I realised I really rattled through those, but really it's just to give you a flavour of how we draw learning out from these stories, and then would communicate that. For the purposes of time, I won't go into this in detail, but the most recent way we've been using the storytelling methodology is that we've been working alongside a local partner, Oxford Hub, who were kind of central to Oxford's response to COVID-19. And we collected the stories of 32 people that were involved in that response, which included council employees, staff, volunteers, people who received support, to understand what had changed for them as a result of their involvement. And we then held a series of discussion days that pulled out the learning from those. And at the moment, those kind of learnings are playing a central role in some of the decisions happening in Oxford around the design of services locally. And these are some of the questions that the learning from the stories really provoke us to ask in kind of trying to hold on to the positive things that changed in the way services were designed and collaboration happened during the pandemic. So, you know, it's about, are we investing in relationships going forward? Are we keeping sight of the small things? Are we collaborating with others? Are we enabling less hierarchical decision making and bringing voices into that? Are we being creative and taking risks? And are we empowering and giving agency to local groups and communities? Okay, so that is kind of an overview of storytelling and how we've used it. I'm going to now just kind of look at a couple of aspects of that in a little bit more detail to give you a feel for how it works in practice. So the first part of that is the collecting of the stories themselves. So key to that is kind of who your story collectors are and recruiting them. So at the Old Fire Station, we've recruited a team of volunteer story collectors who, as I mentioned, are staff, the volunteers, the artists, the previous crisis members. They're all people that have an existing relationship to us as an organisation. What's really key in recruiting story collectors is first of all, I think identifying who your storytellers will be, because it's really important that they're people that the storytellers feel that they can speak to openly, that they maybe don't already have, you know, a very kind of close working relationship with. So there aren't kind of, you know, while inevitably there will be kind of power dynamics, because there always are in kind of conversations and story collecting, it's trying to make sure that you're thinking about who's the person the storyteller will feel most comfortable telling their story to. And the conversation that they have, it's guided by 4 key questions. So the key questions we ask are, what did you do? What changed for you? Why was that change important? And what were the main things that made that change happen? Now, what's really crucial is that while there are these 4 questions which frame the conversation, it is very much a conversation. So it shouldn't feel like an interview. It should feel like a discussion. And as much as possible, it should be on the terms of the teller. So it's made very clear they don't have to share anything they don't want to share. They start the story where they want to start it. And a lot of energy goes into making sure people go into the story collecting fully aware of what this process entails and that it's on those terms. And it is the kind of open, often circular nature of these conversations that really brings out the richness of the stories that I think a much shorter interview might not kind of enable. The second kind of thing I wanted to mention was the storytellers themselves. So when deciding the storytellers, you know, for us, the key things is that should be guided by what you want to learn, whose voice needs to be heard, and who wants to share their stories. For us, it's been really important to include, you know, not just beneficiaries in that, but people who've been involved in the project in all different ways and understand impact from all sides. And as I mentioned before, like what's really key is that both the teller and the collector are kind of comfortable and supported through that process. And there's lots more details in the guide about how we approach that. So the next part is the transcribing and the editing of the stories. So the stories, as I mentioned, they're recorded. They're transcribed, which is something where possible, we outsource, and then they're edited down into a story that's about 1 to 2 pages long. And we aim for that story to faithfully reflect the teller's insights into impact and its significance for them, to really accurately keep the teller's voice in the story, so telling it in their own words, and also do it in a way that captures the reader's attention, because you know, we feel that we have a duty to make sure people want to read these stories and that they can be heard in the world. So this is a short excerpt. I'll just give you a moment to read it. That gives a feel for some of the stories and how we try and keep the texture of the person and their voice in that story. And then the final part of the storytelling process is the discussion sessions. So they're facilitated meetings. As I mentioned, people read the stories in advance, and what's really key is their participative process. So they ask people with different relationships to the organisation, to the stories, to the project, come together and tell us what they hear in the stories, what are the themes coming out, what might this mean going forward. And what's really key about the discussion sessions is they make the process, they're another kind of collaborative aspect of this process. So they mean that the learning from this story, from this process, doesn't sit in a report at the end, but it's kind of something that people are involved in and can kind of feel and participate in, you know, at this stage in the process as well. And it's also a brilliant way to bring people like funders into the room, or people, local partners that you'd also really like to kind of understand the value and the impact and the stories behind the work that you do. And then the very final thing is that we share the stories. So we write reports. We also, we record the stories where possible. The storytellers record their own stories. We also find the stories are really brilliant, creative stimulative materials. So for the Oxford Together stories, we commissioned 20 artists to creatively respond to the stories. We've made a short film, we've commissioned short plays, so we feel like these stories just keep having lives beyond the storytelling and the evaluation part of them themselves. And just to conclude, so I guess why storytelling's work for us is that, you know, first of all, which kind of comes back to something that was mentioned by Jude at the beginning, that, you know, storytelling, it really starts with listening. It enables the people involved in the project to tell us what impact looks like for them, and for us not to presuppose that. They're holistic, so they understand change and impact within the context of a person and their life. They are collaborative from every single part of the storytelling process, brings different people into it. They're incredibly creative, and also they're meaningful. You know, we found that storytellers tend to really value the experience of having that space to tell their story. That the story collectors find it a really kind of fulfilling, worthwhile role, and that for people coming to the discussion sessions, it can be really enjoyable too. So it's felt like a really kind of meaningful thing for us as an organisation, and it's kind of it's really enriched our learning. It's also enriched our communications, our creative projects, and the way we report to funders. Something people often ask us is how funders respond to this, and the answer is that they are unanimously supportive. And while we do still count numbers, and we know that that is important, this is the principal way that we now evaluate, and that's been accepted by all of our funders. And so yeah, and many of them actually fund us because off the back of us using storytelling. So that is kind of an overview of storytelling as we use it at the old fire station. It's just 12:15 now, so we're just going to go into breakout rooms now. You'll have 10 minutes, and this will just be a chance to discuss together, you know, thoughts and reflections about storytelling, how this might relate to your own practice, and also any questions. And we'll then come back, and there'll be a short time at the end just to kind of ask any questions or share anything that's helpful from those discussions.